Listen, I mean, the chaos continues. I think that, it's really hard to listen to the current CA chair talk about the the kind of economy that President Trump wants to see, but how chaotic this implementation is and how it doesn't make sense in terms of spurring the kind of investment that we need to see all across the United States. I think, you see these price spikes because the president is saying that he's going to impose, new tariffs on copper at this point. But A, we don't know whether or not that's going to stick. And B, that makes it so difficult for investors all across the country and for businesses to make plans. And as the previous segment pointed out, it's very difficult for industries that actually build things to turn on a dime in the way that the president seems to want them to do. Again, the chaos doesn't help, but even if you said, we want you to all change your supply chains overnight, the world just doesn't work that way. These are, they have to be built. You have to figure out all of your new suppliers. You have to make sure that you can produce domestically. And the president, with the other, part of his policy agenda, is stripping our ability to make those investments. We saw the passage of the Republican budget bill that is actually making cutbacks in the kinds of investments around the country that would create those stable incentives for investment. So, what I see is a chaotic implementation of a plan that is not leading to economic outcomes that the president has promised and are likely to lead to more chaos, less domestic production in things that really matter, as businesses just can't quite sort out what the heck he's thinking.
Well, Heather, another economic outcome it hasn't necessarily led to, at least yet, that was expected, is materially higher inflation. And I ask this knowing we're getting a CPI report next week, and the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has suggested it's this summer that he believes the effect of tariffs will start showing up in price data. Do you expect we start to see that next week? When does it hit?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Certainly, if you're adding on these tariffs onto the things that people are buying, then prices are going to go up. The question is, how soon will that happen? As you noted, people expected that would start to really be binding in the summer. But it does really depend on whether or not these tariffs stick and where they stick and how much of those costs are passed on to consumers. Given the direction of the economy and all of the concerns that we're seeing from all of the different kinds of soft data, the consumer surveys, the business surveys, it seems like people all across America, consumers, families, businesses, CEOs, are very worried about the direction. So that probably means that they might be holding back. Maybe firms might not increase prices so quickly because they're a little bit afraid of losing their customers, but maybe they will. And we know that these tariffs will lead to probably a one-time increase in prices, and we're likely to see the effects of that, coming down the pipeline. But again, it all hinges on whether or not the president actually makes it stick. I think one of the longer-term implications is what this does to investment and jobs all across the country, that affects the long-term prices that families see on the things that they buy. And I think that chaos is going to be with us for a long time.
If we look back to the True Social post from President Trump this morning, he suggests that the current Fed rate is at least 3 points too high. Now that you're outside the White House and can actually comment on Fed policy and the Fed funds rate, do you see us as being 300 basis points too high?
Well, you can't do all sorts of things that will raise prices and think it's going to end well. So, I mean, that seems a little bit out of bounds, or a lot out of bounds, relative to where the economy is, relative to where the Fed is trying to get inflation, back down to its 2% level. He is, of course, doing these tariffs, which we think will, again, if he sticks with them, raise prices, particularly over the next few months. He's upending supply chains for businesses all across the country. That is going to add to prices and challenges for businesses and for consumers. So no, it does not seem sensible that we would lower interest rates at that scale that he's talking about at this time. And I think the Fed is staffed by a lot of smart, thoughtful, methodical people who are going to be looking at the data as it comes in and probably give that conclusion. Let me give a caveat though. There's a lot of, again, soft data coming in, and it has been for a couple of months now, that, consumers, CEOs, businesses are all worried about the direction of the economy. So if we have what I'm already going to name here a Trump session, if we have one, and I'm not saying that we will, but if we do, then of course the Fed will step in. But it seems like in calling for lowering interest rates, the president himself is worried that he's going to cause a recession. He said, a while back that, it was fine if we did one, that, he wasn't worried about that. So I think, in trying to understand where he's going here, I think he's trying to hedge his bets because he knows that everything else he's doing to the economy is chaotic and is not going to lead to the kind of investment and good jobs that people need to see all across the country.
Well, lastly, Heather, then, do you support the idea that the Fed would, in fact, maybe not 300 basis points, but be cutting now if it were not for Donald Trump himself? The man who's demanding the cuts is keeping the cuts from happening with this tariff policy.
Well, that's a counterfactual that we don't really know. I mean, certainly when President Biden left office in January, he handed over an economy that was, growing and strong and stable. Wages were going up. So, I mean, where we are now is an economy with a high degree of uncertainty. But again, wage growth is now slower. We're seeing job growth. It's still there, but it's a little bit, when you look under the hood, there's some concerns. A lot of that growth last month was in state and local government. That's, how long will that continue? So I think there are a lot of concerns now that we didn't have. So what the Fed is going to do is certainly 100% being influenced by the policies that Trump has taken over the past few months and the management or mismanagement of the economy since then.